Block 0107. In the beginning, when God formed the heavens and the earth, he prepared a special place, set apart from everything else he had created. It was a garden filled with life, harmony, and unparalleled beauty. The breeze was gentle, the lush trees bowed to the wind as if praising him, and rivers cut through the fertile soil with crystal clear waters. This place was the Garden of Eden. It was there, in this paradise carefully shaped by his hands, that God decided to form the human being, not like the other creatures, but in his image and likeness. From the dust of the earth, he formed Adam, and when he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, the man became a living soul. Adam opened his eyes in the midst of perfection. His first sight was the clear blue sky. His first sound, the harmonious song of creation. He was alive, and his existence had purpose. God entrusted Adam with the responsibility of caring for Eden. Every plant, every animal, everything was under his watch. And as a sign of authority, Adam himself named all the animals. But even in such abundance, something was missing. God, who knows the deepest part of the heart, saw that it was not good for man to be alone. So, while Adam slept a deep sleep, God took one of his ribs and, with divine delicacy, formed the woman. When Adam saw her for the first time, his eyes filled with awe and joy. He recognized in her something no other creature had, flesh of his flesh, bone of his bones. And so Eve was created, not as an inferior being, but as part of Adam, an ideal companion, made from the same essence. The Garden of Eden then became the home of both. They lived in full communion with God, at peace with themselves and with all of creation. There was no guilt, shame, or pain. Each day was a new discovery, each evening a new conversation with the Creator. And in the center of the garden, two trees stood out, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God gave them freedom, but also a clear boundary. They could eat from all the trees except one. The command was simple, direct, and just. Eden was more than a physical place. It was a reflection of the perfect harmony between God, man, and creation. And there, at the beginning of everything, humanity had its first chapter written with love, purpose, and freedom. Time passed, and each new dawn in Eden felt like the very first. Adam and Eve lived in perfect harmony, not only with each other, but with all of nature around them. The animals did not fear humans, the plants grew without thorns, and the fruits were sweet and plentiful. Everything flowed naturally, as if the world itself breathed peace. The relationship between Adam and Eve was pure, without malice or suspicion. They lived naked, but felt no shame, for innocence still reigned in their hearts. This was the life God had dreamed for humankind. A full existence, free from pain, sin, and death. And every afternoon, as the day came to an end, God walked through the garden. His presence was felt with gentleness and reverence. It was during these moments that Adam and Eve spoke with the Creator, asked questions, received guidance, and learned about the world and themselves. It was an intimate relationship, direct, without barriers. But even in the most beautiful of settings, there was a choice. God had given the couple free will, the ability to decide to obey or not. And that choice was symbolized by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It looked no different from the other trees, but its fruit carried something beyond taste. It carried the weight of knowledge, of awareness, of the separation between good and evil. Then the serpent appeared. Cunning, silent, and sneaky, it approached Eve with enticing words. The serpent was not just a common animal, there was a cunning in it that came from something darker. With words disguised as wisdom, it planted doubt. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree? Eve, surprised, replied that they could eat from all the trees except that one, for God had said they would die if they did. But the serpent, with its subtle voice, contradicted God's words. You will not die. God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like him, knowing good and evil. It was then, in that moment, that Eve's heart wavered. The fruit looked delicious, pleasing to the eyes and desirable for gaining wisdom. A desire that had never existed before rose within her, the desire to be like God. And at that moment, the decision that would change the course of humanity was made. Eve reached out, picked the forbidden fruit, and took the first bite. Its taste was sweet, but the flavor of guilt was still unknown to her. Without hesitation, she also gave it to Adam, who was with her. He too ate, and at that very moment, something changed. Their eyes were opened. But what they saw was not divine wisdom or heavenly light. They saw that they were naked. For the first time, they felt shame. They ran to cover their bodies with fig leaves, trying to hide what now felt wrong. Innocence had been lost, and in its place came awareness, fear, guilt. What had once been natural now seemed exposed. Their hearts, once light, now carried a new and unfamiliar weight. And when they heard the voice of God in the garden at dusk, they hid. That sound, which once brought peace, now brought fear. God's presence, once desired, was now avoided. But God, who sees all, called out to them, Adam, where are you? It was not a question of location, but of condition. Where was the one who lived in communion? Where was the pure man, free and unashamed? Adam answered with a trembling voice, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Then God asked, Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from? Instead of taking responsibility, Adam pointed to Eve. The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit and I ate. And Eve in turn blamed the serpent. The serpent deceived me and I ate. This was the first cycle of the fall: disobedience, shame, fear, and the attempt to justify one's own mistakes. Humanity had broken the perfect harmony it had with God. Disobedience brought consequences, and Eden, once a symbol of divine presence, now became a place to leave behind. Now, outside of Eden, Adam and Eve faced a new reality. The world around them still bore traces of the original creation, but it was now also marked by pain, hard work, and the consequences of sin. The silence that was once filled with God's presence now felt more distant, and each day served as a reminder of what had been lost. But even in the face of the fall, God did not abandon them. Adam and Eve stayed together. They built a life, put down roots. Eve gave birth to her first son, Cain, and then Abel. Life moved forward, though not without challenges, and humankind, even outside Eden, still bore the image of God. Adam carried with him the memory of the garden, of conversations with God at dusk, of the beauty that once was. That memory was both a burden and a hope, a reminder of what had been lost, but also a reason to believe in the promise made back in Eden, the day when the woman's offspring would crush the serpent's head. From that point on, humanity's story would be marked by highs and lows, by falls and new beginnings, but also by a constant pursuit of redemption. And all of it began there, with that first breath of life, with the dust of the earth shaped by God's hands. Creation, which had begun perfect, now longed for restoration. Each sunrise was a reminder that God's mercy was still being renewed. Each season pointed to His faithfulness. And humankind, though distant, was still the object of His love. God then turned first to the serpent. It had been the instrument of lies, the channel of deceit, and so it was the first to hear judgment. Because you have done this, cursed are you above all animals. You will crawl on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. But there was more, a promise hidden in the sentence. God declared there would be enmity between the serpent and the woman, between her offspring and the promised one who would one day crush the serpent's head. Even in the midst of the fall, God was already outlining a plan of redemption. Next, God spoke to Eve. Because she had listened to the serpent and eaten the fruit, she would face pain in childbirth, and her relationship with Adam would now be marked by conflict. The gift of motherhood would come with suffering, and the tie, harmony between man and woman, would no longer be natural as before. Finally, God addressed Adam. The soil, once generous, would now produce thorns and weeds. Work, once a pleasure, would now become laborious. By the sweat of his brow, he would obtain food until he returned to the dust from which he was formed. The price of disobedience was separation, the burden of life and death. The rupture was complete. And then, God made garments of skin for Adam and Eve, not just to cover their bodies, but as a sign of the first sacrifice. For the first time, an innocent animal was killed because of human sin. One life replacing another. It was the beginning of a long journey where blood would be a sign of atonement. The Garden of Eden, once a home, could no longer shelter humankind. God expelled them so they would not eat from the tree of life and live forever in a fallen state. At the garden's entrance, he placed cherubim and a flaming sword that turned in all directions, guarding access to the tree of life. And so, humanity was cast out of paradise. Eden was left behind, closed. But the promise had been made. A descendant would come. One day, the serpent would be defeated, and the path back to the heart of God had begun. The legacy of Adam and Eve did not end with their expulsion from Eden. They were the first to experience God's love, His correction, His justice, and also His mercy. They were the first parents, the first to grieve, and the first to understand the depth of the separation caused by sin. Over generations, their descendants would hear stories about the garden, about the Creator, and about that time when man walked side by side with God. These accounts would be passed from father to child until the day they were recorded in eternal words. The book of Genesis, which we read today, carries the seeds of that tradition, a faithful testimony of the origin of all things. Adam lived many years after leaving Eden. He saw sons and grandsons grow up, and he also saw sin spread. But he also carried hope, the promise. Every generation born was a possibility for the fulfillment of God's word, that someone would come to restore what had been broken. Eve, in turn, was the first to feel the joy of motherhood and the pain of loss. She carried in her womb the beginning of humanity and also the weight of the mistake. But like every mother, she hoped for better days for her children. Even having been deceived, it was through her that the promise of salvation would come. The story of Adam and Eve is not just about the fall. It's also about responsibility, consequences, and hope. God did not destroy them. On the contrary, He preserved them. He taught them, guided them, and loved them, even outside the garden. Because God's love is not limited to paradise, it extends even to our worst decisions. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. This was just the second chapter of a long walk through the stories of the Bible, told in a simple, deep way, with a keen eye on the details. Do you see how every choice Adam and Eve made still echoes in our decisions today? The story of creation, the fall, and the promise of redemption is not just a record of the past. It speaks directly to our lives now. If you enjoyed this way of telling the story, with immersive narration and a focus on events as if we were watching them unfold before our eyes, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That helps me keep producing this content with care and quality. Leave a like on the video and share it with someone you think would enjoy hearing these stories. And of course, I'd love to hear from you. Are you enjoying this format? How was it for you to hear the story of Adam and Eve told this way? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'll be happy to read and reply. May this spiritual journey continue to guide us on paths of understanding, faith, and connection with God. See you in the next episode.